and thank you for joining me for another video. Today we're going to be talking about Coma, which was written by Robin Cook, published in 1977, and the genres are fiction, horror, mystery, thriller. Yeah. Okay, and that's Percy's 2 cents on it. Sorry, 3 cents. So, like it's published in 1977. It is a medical mystery thriller type book. So this book starts off with us meeting a routine patient, came in through the emergency room, having some local discomfort, all of that, and she goes into meeting of the doctors in the emergency room. They find out that she's going to need a minor surgical procedure done, so they're prepping her for the minor surgery. Everything is fine so far, and this is a teaching hospital, the Boston Memorial Hospital, and so you have a bunch of doctors that are in their residency, of them just finishing medical school, going into the system, kind of get that hands-on experience. So we're given the surgical resident's POV as well as the anesthesiologist's POV, and they're going through this minor surgery. Everything's routine, everything's like the way it should be, everything is kind of just like they're all copacetic, everything's fine. And then out of nowhere, the anesthesiologist sees that the patient's oxygen levels are tanking, and they don't know why. They don't know why. He's trying to adjust the oxygen levels while the patient's undergoing their pre-surgery or starting surgery, I guess. And oxygen levels are still dropping, and the patient goes into a coma. And the anesthesiologist and the surgeon resident are both super upset because they had stellar records that they accomplished throughout their whole time at the Boston Memorial Hospital. So they were super stoked on getting another surgery under their belt with nothing going wrong, and then something did. And that's the introduction to the main problem in the book. And after that, we're introduced to our main character, Susan Wheeler. Susan Wheeler, wow. Susan Wheeler is just finished med school. I mean, she's starting her residency at the Boston Memorial Hospital with a round of other new doctors. There's about 5 or 6 of them. We're given little overviews of them, but none of them really impact the story at all. And she's just one in a school or a class of like 5 or 6, and she's starting her residency at the Boston Memorial Hospital. She gets there with her classmates and her new colleagues, and they are given over to Mark. I'm pretty sure it's Mark. Yes, Mark Bellows. I'm trying to get better at remembering names. Before, when I was reading these, I would take my notes, or I wouldn't take notes at all, because when I read, it was like when I watched a movie. I'm just absorbing it. I did not actively think on it as much unless it was like nonfiction or something, or actively write things down. I am working on it. I'm getting a little bit better. But Mark is the top resident that's going to be teaching them, showing them how to do things, and going through their lectures, their classrooms, making their schedules, yada, yada, yada. And so he's in charge of them. He meets them, and he decides that he's going to let them know that he is their boss. So as soon as they get there, he gives them very vague instructions on how to get to the classroom that he wants them to get to. Instead of just think of like your first day on any job or first day of school or anything, you're just like, I don't know where to go. You're always given that like, oh, be at this classroom, be at this building, this office at this time. They were given a time, and they were told to pretty much find him at the hospital. So they end up being like 30 minutes late to the classroom. And he did this by design so he could put them in their place. So he starts yelling at them and getting upset with them, telling them about how scheduling is the utmost thing that they need to do. They need to be more prepared for their time at the hospital. And sorry, my dog is right there. But he starts getting mad at them and everything, and he's trying to get really heated with them so he can instill fear into them so they know he's the boss. And Susan's there, and she's the only woman in this class, and woman doctors are very rare. This is written back in the 70s. There was not a lot of women doctors that were going through, and Mark sees her and he kind of loses his steam. He starts to be like, oh, there's a woman here, and realizes she's a fellow doctor. So he is instantly put off by her, and he's just like, all right, well, I don't want to deal with that noise. But she's pretty. She's really pretty. And we get beaten over with this fact throughout the whole book. She is apparently very pretty and very smart, and is used to people underestimating her because of how she looks. But he loses his steam. He sees her and he's just like, she's really pretty. And so it goes through, lets them know that their information is going to be given to the nurses station. So they will start being given small tasks to do that they should be good with. They should have learned in medical school. They should have had a lot of hands-on experience in medical, like medical drawing blood, helping fill out charts, give prescriptions, and all of these like smaller things. And that the nurse is going to start to page them. So to keep an ear out for it. And he takes them on a tour of the hospital, shows them where the classrooms are, shows them where the conference rooms are, where they'll be receiving their lectures, gives them the scheduling of when their lectures are going to be, just your basic orientation. And one of the ways they go through is they go through this area where all the coma patients are held. And he explains to them that they'll each be taking turns with their patients. They'll each have like a rotation of patients, and they'll each be taking turns caring for a coma patient. So they all get the experience. And Susan is following along with everybody. In her mind, she's just like, this guy isn't just a jerk. He's just a jerk. He's on a power trip. He's just a jerk. And she's really writing him off as a person as a whole. She's like, all right, I have to do what he says because he's my boss, but I'm not going to try and interact with him. He's not worth my time. And they go into this coma patient wing, and she sees the patient that was in the beginning of the book, in the prologue. And she gets really freaked out. She's super smart, and she really wanted to be a doctor, but she lacks the bedside manner. She lacks the personal side, dealing with patients. She dreads doing that. She hates dealing with patients. She hates trying to talk to them, connect with them, put them at ease. And so she's been, throughout the little beginning part of it, she's like, I want to be a doctor because I want something that challenges me intellectually, but I do not want to be a doctor because I don't want to have to talk to patients. I don't want to have to deal with people. And so she's been debating on all of this, and then she sees the patient that was at the beginning. The patient was a young woman that was about her age, early 20s. And she kind of looks like Susan. So Susan starts to freak out a little bit that there's this young patient. She completely ignores Mark and the rest of her class. She goes right up to this patient, grabs the chart, and starts going through it to see what happened. Mark sees that she's over there. He's like, hey, what you doing? And she tells him, like, what, this patient is in a coma. Why? What happened? And he takes the chart away from her, and he's like, as you can see right here, she went through a minor surgical procedure, and there was an issue in the surgery suite, and now she's in a coma. And Susan's like, well, what happened in the surgery suite? And he was like, you see it right here on the chart. It says that her oxygen level dropped. And then Susan at this point reminds me of a toddler. It's just, why? Why? Every time she gets information from Mark, she goes, why? Why? And Mark starts to get really annoyed with it. He doesn't like people asking him questions. So he's just like, this is just what happened. And she's like, she's my age. She's like, we could have been friends. And he was like, well, that happens. He's like, this is bad things happen to good people. He's like, there's always these type of incidents going on. He was like, look at all of these patients. They are all in a coma. He's like, this happens. And she's starting to freak out, and she's starting to let that freak out become apparent, and she doesn't hear her name being paged on the intercom system, and Mark has to tell her like 2 or 3 times. He's like, you're being paged, you have to go to the nurse's station. And then Mark's thinking like, she is super emotional, like this woman is super emotional, I don't even know if she'll be worth my time to ask on a date. And so he pulls her aside, and he's like, look, you have to get your head on straight, you have to, just get your shit together, just get your shit together. And he's like, you are paged, go check the nurse's station. So she goes to check the nurse's station, and she's like, all right, I was paged. And the nurses like to pick on the new doctors, and the new doctors get super salty about this, like very, very quickly. But it's funny because my mom is a registered nurse. She worked in a teaching hospital with a lot of brand new doctors. And yeah, they pick on them a lot because my mom would always tell me, like, the brand new doctors cause the biggest problems. Because they came out of medical school, a lot of them are like, I know everything, and I'm going to talk down to this person who's been working here for 10, 15, 20 years. And they don't know what they're doing. So I get that. I get the nurses side of it on why they pick on new doctors, and it made me giggle. But the way that the new doctors like immediately were like, I'm gonna get them back. I was like, okay, see, now you're just gonna be a part of the problem. But she goes to the nurse's station. They just like, go. We need you to go do something over there. It's a simple thing. We need to pull blood from this guy. And she's like, okay, I've done this a couple of times. Like, it's a specific type of blood drawing that she's like, I can do this. And the guy's there. She looks at him and she's like, oh, he's pretty handsome. He's very nice looking. And he is super nervous. He's a little jittery, he's a little nervous, like he's going in for a minor surgical procedure. But he doesn't like needles. He's scared of being under anesthesia, and he's just really, really nervous. And so you have a brand new doctor coming up to him, and when he is nervous, he talks. So he's just chattering on with her, and Susan, not being able to connect well with patients or anything, is having a hard time talking with him, but he doesn't really notice because he's nervous talking, and he just talks over her and everything, and then he lets her know that she's kind of cute, and he starts flirting with her, which throws her off of what she's doing. And she's like, I need to figure out how to do this specific blood drawing thing. And she's like, I will not call a nurse over here to do this for me. I can't do that. This is a real patient. I need to do this. And she's trying to focus and do it, but he's still talking with her. And then she starts talking with him back, and they start just having a conversation. And he tells her that pretty much his whole life story of he has an injury, where he got it from, what his job is, where he lives, what the whole doctors told him. It's just like his whole backstory. Well, she's just sitting there with a needle in her hand, like, okay. And they start talking some more, they're flirting more, and he asked her out he's like, when I get out of here, just like, do you want to go get something to eat, like grab some dinner? And she's just like, yeah, that'll be fun, maybe, we'll see when you're healed. And she finally is able, the nurse comes over there, and the nurse is like, do you need help? Do you want me to do it? And she's like, no, I can do this. And so you have the nurse there that's kind of watching her, and she gets more nervous, and the nurse is like, here, let me help you out and do this real quick so I can practice. And the nurse draws the blood, but she shows Susan how to do it. So Susan's like, okay. And then she goes to find Mark and the rest of her class. They're still doing a whole tour of the place, and she's kind of giddy because she has a date. And Mark meets up with her and everything. They're like, all right, this is your schedule. These are things that are going on. And they keep going on rounds. They go on rounds for the rest of the day. And by the time they're done with their day, she's just like, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I've been walking all day. She goes back to the medical dorms, I guess, the dorms that are attached to or attached near the medical center classes, the memorial hall, all of. She goes to her dorm room, and she's just there thinking about how her whole day is and what she wants to do with her life. She's like, do I really want to be a doctor? Like, everybody was telling me I don't need to be a doctor. She's like, but I really like thinking about doctor stuff. And while she's thinking about that, the guy that she was flirting with goes to the surgical suite, is put under, and surgery starts. But then he starts losing oxygen. And then he goes into a coma. So the next day, when Susan goes back in there and they're doing their rounds again, all together, they've done their first lecture class, everything, they're doing their rounds. She sees him and the coma wing patients, and she starts freaking out again. She's like, I just talked to this guy. We just had a conversation. And Mark's just like, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean you know this guy? And she's like, remember I was paged yesterday? And he was like, yeah, I remember that. She's like, I had to draw this guy's blood. And he's like, okay, so? And she's freaking out. She's like, I talked to him. We were going to go on a date. He was a real person. And Mark is just like, they're all real people. Like, I don't understand. It happens. She goes back to the same thing that happened the day before. What happened? And he pulls up the chart, and he's like, right here, says that there was a complication in the surgical suite, and he started losing oxygen. She's like, why? And he's like, look right here, it says he started losing oxygen. And it's like, that keeps going on for a while. And this whole conversation makes Susan want to know what happened. Like, she's just like, this is 2 patients that I've seen in 2 days. There's obviously a connection somewhere. Something's wrong. I need to figure it out. And she's like, I need to investigate these. And Marty's like, there's nothing to investigate. This is just, it happens. And she's like, you know what the chances are of these happening at this point in time? Like, these 2 same things happening to 2 different patients going in for 2 different surgeries within 2 different days. She's like, you know what the chances of that happening? And he's like, I don't know. And she does the math for him. And so she's just like, I need to know what's going on. I'm going to investigate this. And that's a big thing between the dynamic between Susan and Mark, is he was coming in like this big, like, I'm the boss, until he saw how pretty she was and that she can talk coherently. But he also liked that she freaked out. So she's like, oh, she's just a woman. She's just a woman. So emotional, just like women are. I think I can date her. And since he made that decision in his mind, he's just kind of like lets her do whatever she wants. Like, he's not like strict with her or anything. Like, if any one of the other classmates was like, I'm gonna go off and do an investigation, I may write a dissertation on a research paper on this, and he'd been like, no, go do rounds. He would have been getting mad at them. But Susan, no. Susan's like, I'm gonna go do this, and it'll be fine. And he's just kind of like, no. But she's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the thing. And he's just like, okay. So she goes off, she starts investigating it. She starts to piss off the heads of just about every department that is connected to these surgeries. And she starts accusing them of doing something wrong and trying to cover it up. And she's just like, you guys did this. This was obviously her fault. She starts with the anesthesiologist, then she starts with the surgery resident, then she goes to the nursing staff, and then all of these people, accusing them of doing something wrong and covering it up with these 2 different patients. And so they get mad at her and they start getting upset with her, and she's like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't you, and just kind of checks them off a list, goes to the next place. She's able to use the computer that's a part of the hospital, and this being the 70s, the computer took up like a whole floor. Like, it had a whole thing. It was behind like the glass walls, and there's like one person that gets to input a request into the computer for it to send back the results of a search. And then he puts that on paper with the results of the search, prints them out, and then sends them through the in-house mail delivery system to whatever office put in the request. So she watches somebody put in a request, and she kind of counterfeits their request, but puts in coma patient parameters in the search. And she's familiar with computers, or this type of computer, because it was in one of her classes that she took in college. So she's like, all right, I know what I'm doing here. And she wants to be able to input the stuff in herself, but she can't because the guy's like, no, that's my job. And he's like, well, I need a stamp from a head of a department. I need signatures. I need this. And she just kind of charms her way into letting him do that, but using the head of one department's names. And she does this like, I just started here. I'm new. And she's like, I'm just a frazzled female, and I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask for this. And oh no, the guy's going to be so mad at me. And the guy's just like, it's okay. It's okay. I understand. It's fine. It's fine. Just let him know that he needs to get the signature to me as soon as he can, and I'll put this through. And she's like, oh, thank you. So she does that. She goes and she goes to the library, and then she starts looking at all the patients' charts, and she's just starting this whole investigation of gathering information. And at the end of the day, her and Mark go get dinner, and Mark's telling her this is a stupid thing. Like, it's not worth your time. You should be learning how to be a doctor and just let this go. And then she starts picking on him for not being curious and inquisitive and wanting to know the truth of the situation of what's going on in the hospital. And this isn't like not true. He's become jaded through his residency years of just being like, oh, this is just how things are. I'm just going to keep on going, and then maybe I'll get a position here, or maybe I'll go to this other hospital when my residency's done. So he's kind of like at that point where he can leave and go to a different hospital, and he's just like, I don't care, really. I don't care. And so she goes back to her dorm room, and she's like, okay. The next day she comes in, and she's able to start more research on comas and everything. And she stops going to the classes that she's supposed to go. She stops going to the lectures she's supposed to. And because there's a woman doctor, there's a woman resident, Mark's boss's boss just starts showing up to the lectures, and he's like, hey, you're missing a person, because he wanted to see the novelty of a woman doctor. And he wanted to introduce himself because it's very rare. So he's like, I want to see this person. And he's like, obviously she is not here. Where is she? And Mark's like, well, she's working on, he's trying to come up with the excuse without telling them that she's working on an investigation that may lead to a research paper. And she told him he was going to do it. And he's just like, okay. So he's trying to be like, well, she's doing this and she's doing that. And the boss's boss is like, well, I should see her at the next lecture, right? So because he's there, and then after that, his boss's boss talks to his boss, who then talks to Mark and is yelling at him for letting a brand new resident go off and do whatever she pleases. Like, oh, what are you doing, Mark? What are you doing? And so he's like, all right, well, now I have to go find Susan. He goes to find Susan, and he tells her, look, you need to stop this. This is going to be detrimental to your career. This is nonsensical. This is just stupid. You need to do the regular residency stuff. And while he's talking to her, she's just like, this poor, stupid little man doesn't understand the potential of this information, like what it could do for the medical field as a whole. And she's just kind of nodding at him. And then she's like, how about this? Give me 3 days. Give me 3 days. And we'll see how this goes. And he's like, no, you need to be at the lectures and you need to do this. And she's like, okay, 2 days. Give me 2 days. And he's like, no, you have to be at the... I was yelled at. I'm supposed to yell at you. And she's like, maybe a day and a half. And somebody finds her to tell her to try and be like, I was told to find you for this computer search results thing. She gets super excited. She's like, okay, thank you, Mark, bye. As she runs off to go do more investigating, and Mark's just like, maybe I couldn't date her. She doesn't listen to me. Like that's what he is thinking. It tells us in the book. And so she goes off on the investigation. She's like, okay, she sees a whole list of patients that have gone into a coma. She starts getting what's similar in their charts, what's similar in their ages. She just starts compiling the data. Now she's trying to organize it into something that makes sense. She starts investigating each coma patient and crossing off ones that could be actual issues of why they're in a coma and stuff that are like the two patients that we were already introduced into. And she starts sorting those into lists and all of this, and she just kind of keeps on investigating that way. And she's able to look at the suite. She starts noticing that most of these start happening in a specific suite. There's 8 different surgical suites in this hospital. And they're always busy. They're 24-hour suites, but usually in off hours, it closes down to 4 suites. And then they're used, they're cleaned, they're prepped, they're ready to go again. They're used, they're cleaned. There's the whole cycle of these 4 rooms. The other 4 rooms are reserved for larger surgeries that happen more during the day. And like longer surgeries, so they're not used as often. And so she's just like, what is up with this room? She puts on some nurse's scrubs, pretends to be a nurse, goes down into the surgical suites to get past security because they're like, what are you doing down here? You're not a surgeon. So she pretends to be a surgical nurse. And she covers her face, everything, and she just goes in there. She starts poking around in the surgical suite, trying to see what's different. She starts turning on levers and everything, and she sees that all of the tubing for like oxygen and stuff are into tubes that go into the ceiling. And so she goes out of the suite and into the locker rooms because she's just a small little fragile female. So she goes in there and she's like, I'm gonna go into the ceiling and I'm gonna see what I can find. Maybe it's something wrong with the pipes. Maybe there's a cut in one of them. Maybe one of them's corroded. Maybe some type of other chemical got into or is leaking onto one of the pipes. And she's just thinking of how that could happen. So she goes into the ceiling. She starts poking around in there, goes to where the suite is, starts looking, as she notices that there is a smaller, like, oxygen tank connected to one of the pipes. And everything is labeled because it's very, like, it's a hospital, so all of the pipes, all of the hoses are labeled, and they're all going the ways that they're supposed to. And so she's like, okay, there's this little cylinder there. She goes to every other surgical suite to double check to see if this is normal, because if this thing is on all the pipes, then obviously she's like, okay, this is just how the pipes work. But it's not. It's only on that one. She's like, well, that's suspicious. And she starts messing with it and realizes that it's like the carbon monoxide and it's attached to the oxygen tank. And there's a little knobby thing on it and it's connected to the oxygen line. But it has the little, not a spigot, a little turny thing to turn it either on and have it go into the oxygen line as well, or turn it off so it's just regular oxygen. So she's like, okay, well, that's totes sus. That's really sus. So she goes away and she's like, well, okay, I need to figure out what's going on with this. She starts looking into where these gases could come from. She's like, are they just around? Are they readily available? Does this require specific type of clearances? So she starts, this is still night, she starts using her little disguise and everything. She goes up to the administration offices and starts poking around in all the head doctor's offices, trying to be like, where would this come from? And while she's doing that, she's almost caught constantly. Like, she is almost caught so many times poking around in all of these places. Like, if it just took someone being like, hey, you don't look like you belong here. Or like one of them, she hides in a closet, but something falls down and she's almost caught, but the nighttime nurse or janitor custodian person is just wants to use the doctor's phone to make long distance phone calls. So it's just like somebody's just trying to do other things than their job, so they're not really paying attention. And those are the only reasons she doesn't get caught. She's able to find a name of a doctor that has ordered some of a large amount of these things. Like he's kind of in charge of ordering more pharmaceuticals for his department, and his orders in the past have gotten a little weird. And she started looking at the history of it. She's like, okay. She copies down his information. The next day, she doesn't even go to the hospital to check in. She's just like, all right, I'm gonna call in sick and say I have a stomach bug, and she's gonna go straight to that guy's address. She gets to the address, and it's like a whole abandoned road of like abandoned houses and buildings. Doesn't look like anybody lives there. And she took a taxi there. She's like, all right, this is weird. She goes to the house. She sees that, she opens the door and it's trashed. It's abandoned. There's stairs that are broken down that go to the second floor, but she's like, I can't go up that. That's broken. Obviously nothing's happening. And she's like, well, now I feel stupid. I felt really stupid. And she's like, I'm jeopardizing things. Maybe Mark is right. I don't know. This is just terrible. I'm wasting my life. And as she's going to leave, she hears something downstairs. And she's like, oh, there's a basement here? I wonder what's down there. So she goes into the creepy basement and sees that somebody is living there. It's not a finished basement, but there's clothes there, there's a bed, there's like a pull-out couch with a radio, and there's books everywhere. She's like, okay, somebody's obviously living here. And she's just walking down, just like picking at things, trying to figure out if the doctor's living here or if this is like a squatter. And so while she's checking the basement, she looks around and she sees the guy she's looking for, the doctor. Except he's hanging from a wooden beam in the ceiling. And so he is not alive anymore. And she freaks out and leaves. And she gets to a payphone. She calls Mark and lets him know what's going on and where she's at. Because he's like, what are you talking about? Where are you? And she tells him, and she's like, okay. She gets back to her dorm, and she's just like, by the time she gets back there, it's like dark. And she's like, I'm just a little traumatized of what's going on. Mark went to the house. He saw the person. He called the police and let them know what was happening. Turns out this doctor was stealing drugs from the hospital and using and selling them. And right before he was going to be caught, something changed in his habits. And that's when he started ordering all of this, like carbon monoxide or carbon something. And so that was odd. And like, he's no longer alive to be able to be like, this is what happened. And so Susan's at her dorm room. She's traumatized. She's just like, this is a lot to handle. And there is a man in her room who just kind of pops out of nowhere, and he's there specifically to scare her. Like, we get to hear his inner creepy monologue, and it's just gives me the ick. It was gross of what he's thinking of while he looks at her, while he punches her in the face and like throws her in the tub and tells her to stop investigating. So after he beats her up a little bit, he leaves. And so she's freaking out again, but she's just like, I'm gonna take some aspirin and go to bed. She makes sure her door is locked. She goes to bed. And in the morning, she goes back to the hospital, and they see she's arguing with Mark more. Mark's just like, you need to drop this, you need to let it go. Obviously, this is what's happening. He ordered faulty things, or he accidentally did something with the whatever is causing these coma patients. He's like, it's just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Stop it. And she's just like, just give me a little more time. She's like, I'm really close to figuring out what's happening here. And she tells him all of the things she knows, tells him all the information about the different coma patients. She tells him about finding the tampered with oxygen line in this one specific suite. She tells him all of the information she gathered and what led her to that specific doctor. And he's like, okay, this is a lot, but you're sounding kind of crazy. You're sounding kind of crazy. He's like, this is a one-off. You just need to calm down. And so she gets upset, but she's trying to figure it out. And then while this is all going on, there is a brand new place called the Jefferson Institute, and we're shown like newspaper type of articles on the Jefferson Institute, like inserted information into what's showing on the TV, what's playing on the radio, just kind of peppered into the book. And the Jefferson Institute is an institute that was opened in the same town, and what it is it houses long-term coma patients, and that's all it does. It's this giant black square building with no windows, and it's very secluded. It's run off of private grants, so it doesn't really have to be an open place, and it's just nobody really knows what's going on in there except for the brochure type footage of what is in there. And they're like, well, we house coma patients, and while we're researching coma patients, what puts people in comas, what can bring people out of comas, what happens to people while they're in comas, just general coma research. But that's all they have. Those are all the patients they have in there. And she asks him about it, like, do you know how to get in there? And he was like, no. He's like, well, you know what? My boss's boss might. I think he has somebody who's a friend on one of their boards or something. Like, he may be able to get somebody in there, but he's like, I don't know how to do it. But maybe he does. But this is stupid. Don't do it. But maybe he could help. But you should stop. And she's like, okay. And so after they're done with their conversation, she leaves and she goes straight to the boss's boss and charms him into calling them to give her a tour of the place. And while they're talking, there's like the boss's boss is like, look, he's like, I'll do this for you. He's like, but you have to do your regular job. He's like, you need to be here. You need to be a resident, everything. He's like, you need to just do your job or you won't be here anymore. He was like, we'll transfer you out. He was like, if you're not just full on kicked out of this facility. He's like, you need to do your job or there'll be consequences. And she's like, okay. She's like, well, let me do this tour first. And she plays on his sympathies that she doesn't know what kind of doctor she wants to be. And she really enjoys research, and they're having a conversation about it. And he's like, well, there's all different type of fields. And he was just like, there's different types of research, everything you can go about this, which is how she brings in the Jefferson Institute. And she's like, well, maybe there's something like this. And he's like, maybe. I don't know. He's like, but we'll do this. And then before he can get more angry with her, she's just like, oh, did you see I was hit? Like, it's just, my head hurts because of this. I was attacked. I was mugged. And she's like, I think I just need a little bit of aspirin. And I'm having some female problems. And he's just like, okay. He's like, yeah, you can go do that today. That's fine. You can go take a day. And so she leaves and she goes to go to the tour of the Jefferson Institute. But before she gets there, she goes by the city planner's office and gets some blueprints of the building. And while she gets blueprints, she notices that, okay, it's this many stories, there's this many rooms. I can visualize what the place is. And she goes there and she's introduced in. It's very surreal. It's this like huge waiting room that's very white with futuristic type of furniture. And she's waiting there for about 5 to 10 minutes before somebody comes out to greet her. the person tells her that there's not many staff because not many staff is needed. And she's like, do you see this whole wall here? She's like, yeah. She's like, yeah, we can see you through that. Our security's right behind there. And that's where the admin staff is. And she's like, oh, okay. And she's like, well, let me show you to where the families meet the patients. She takes her towards this room, and it looks like a standard hospital room, like a nicer, richer type of hospital room, but just a standard type of hospital room. She was like, oh, okay. And she's asking questions about the patient, and they're telling her how long this guy's been in a coma, and what led him to here, and everything, and what his current progress is. And she was like, so this just looks like a normal hospital. And the person who's giving her the tour, I want to say director, is just like, yeah, it looks like it. And then she's like, well, this part is a little jarring for people. This part gets people every time. And she presses a couple of buttons on the side of the hospital bed, and the sheets lift up. The bed like falls away into two parts, and you see that the patient is being held up by wires in their arms and the sides of their sides and their legs, and with something on their head that just kind of keeps them floating in the air. And when this happens, Susan is a little freaked out, but she is super fascinated by it. And she's like, what is this? And the person giving her the tour is like, well, this is how all of our patients are. She's like, we put them in this room in this way, so it's less jarring for the family to see them like this. But they're all like this. They're all suspended like this. There's tubes coming down from the wires, and she's like, this is how they're all at. All of these wires on a rail system. Like, if you look up, it looks like those tracks for where the hospital beds, they have that curtain thing. It's like that, but it's all throughout the ceiling. And she presses a couple more buttons, and a wall opens up, and the patient just starts to go on the rail system back to where they're at. And because the IVs and the tubing systems go, snake down where the wires are, she's like, everything is automated. She's like, their IVs and everything are automated. She's like, they have their vitals. That information we're able to see on all the computer screens in where we have most of our staff. And she's like, this way they don't get bed sores. We don't have to spend a lot of money in, beds and that kind of costs and everything. She's like, everything's automated here. And she opens that room, and there's just rows and rows and rows and rows of patients. And Susan's just like, wow, this is a lot. She's like, I applaud their ingenuity, but she's like, even for me, this is very odd. And she just walks her through this, just a normal type tour of the building. And she's like, and that's it. So we gave you the tour. Thank you for stopping by. And she ushers her back into the waiting room. And she's like, you can leave at any time. Bye. And Susan's just like, well, where's the rest of the tour? And the person's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Have a good day. And Susan's like, well, I'm missing a whole floor. And she asked questions during the tours, like, is this the only floor? Or how many floors is this building? How many, what's the intake process? What's all the processes for these different type of things? And the person was answering her and seemed very honest, but Susan at the same time was like, okay, well, you're lying about this, you're lying about this, you're lying about this. All right. So she rushes back into, after she thinks that they're not really watching her anymore, because she's like, okay, I'm going to grab my stuff, get ready to go. She's like, I'm pretty sure they're not watching me. She darts back in through there to go find the place that were on the blueprint, but the person didn't show them. And it takes the person a good long minute, and she only figures out that Susan's loose because the security team or a director or somebody higher up is like, hey, where's that person? That person, they figure out that person is the person that's been doing an investigation on what's going on, and we had to hire a hitman to scare her. And now she's here. What did she want? And the person's like, well, she's gone now. It's totally fine. I took care of everything. And she sees Susan's stuff in the waiting room. And she's like, well, where's her stuff? Where's Susan? And they're like, where's she at? And they're like, well, she couldn't have left. What's going on? And they start looking on the security cameras. It turns out she stole the badge from the person and is using that access badge to get into the places that she wasn't shown. And it's a level below. And there's surgical suites. There's some doctors in there. There's kind of looks like a morgue. There's the refrigerator things on the walls. And she's in there. She's kind of freaking out. She's like, okay, yeah, this is not part of the tour, but this was on the blueprints. She starts sneaking around back there, and she hears two doctors that are in a little surgery type suite, and she's listening to them. And what they're doing is they are taking out organs of one of the coma patients. She looks at the coma patient, and it was the dude that was flirting with her, the guy that they had a date when he was healed. And they're taking out some organs, and she's starting to be like, oh no, I know that person, that's that guy. And they're talking just very casually about what's going on. Like, the guy pulls out like a kidney, and he's like, where's this kidney going? And the other doctor's like, oh, I think that's being sent to somebody rich in Arizona or some place like that. And they're like, oh yeah, well, just very nonchalantly, like, yeah, well, this one's going here, that one's going here. I heard somebody bought this and that off of this person. He's like, oh, that's nice. Like, when are the next shipments of patients coming in from Boston Memorial Hospital? And they're like, well, we should have a couple coming up. I heard that we had like one woman and one man that were bought, and they're going to be here like in a week or two. Their surgeries are scheduled at this time, and they're just going over like the logistics of it. And Susan's there listening to everything, and she's like, oh my God, like, what is going on here? And one of the doctors was talking about this guy's death certificate, and like, what are we writing on here? We're just going to put heart failure. We're going to put heart failure, as they are taking out the guy's heart. He's like, yeah, I think heart failure will be nice. And we put these symptoms on it. We need to remember to put this and this on the chart. And so she's freaking out, and security's looking for her. And she goes through all this uncharted part of this whole institute. She ends up going into like the vents, climbing on pipes. You have men with guns looking for her, and it's starting to get like this really big chase. She ends up being able to, well, she's on the pipes and up in the vent area. There's a vent that is going out to the dock. One of the guards is like, we need to check the truck and everything. The truck driver's like, look, I gotta be out of here in like the next couple of minutes. He's like, if I'm gonna get these organs to where they're going, this needs to happen now. I don't have time for your nonsense. And then the guard's like, well, okay, well, I'm just gonna take a quick peek. Everything's fine. And she's able to get out of this vent, like bend out one part, sneak out of it, and then jump on the truck as it's leaving. And that's how she escapes the institute. And they don't realize she escaped for a while, and she's freaking out. She's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And when she's out of there, she goes back to her dorm, and she calls Mark. And she lets Mark know what happened, what's going on. And he tells her that she's being transferred out of Boston Memorial Hospital. He's like, you don't work here anymore. And he's like, I'm sorry to say. He's like, but you don't work here anymore. He's like, so do not come back. You have to report at the VA hospital, which I guess is a subpar hospital to theirs that bad trainees are sent to. And so she's like, well, this is terrible. And he was like, well, you kind of brought this on yourself. And she's like, well, listen to what I'm talking about. And he's like, no, you're out of your mind. I'm not listening to this anymore. And he hangs up on her. And she starts seeing shadows going across her door, and she's like, okay. Starts freaking out again because she was attacked in her dorm room. So she knows there's somebody there. It's the same guy who was sent to scare her from before. He's after her. She's trying to act very calm, and she goes down the fire escape. She gets out of the dorm. He's following her at a distance and trying to catch up to her. She goes into this like little tunnel area that used to connect this dorm to the hospital, as a mean for, doctors and nurses, everybody to get there without having to be like on the streets, but nobody really uses it anymore, but it's still there. And so she goes down there, she starts running. The guy runs after her. She ends up going into a classroom area of the hospital. And she's running around and the guy's like chasing her, catching up to her. And she hides in one of the classrooms. In one of these classrooms, there's a giant refrigerator freezer thing. And she goes in there and it's full of cadavers. Because in this classroom, they go over and they're like dissecting cadavers and doing like surgery type autopsy things on these cadavers. They're learning cadavers, but they're all hanging in this room. So she hides in this refrigerator. The guy comes in there and he's like, well, there's only one place she could be. And when he opens up the refrigerator, he's going in there. He starts getting spooked by the cadavers, and he's just like, I just want to be done with this. I just want to shoot her, be done with this, and I just want to go home. And so he's trying to like look down on the ground to see where her feet are. She's hanging behind one of the cadavers, like hanging onto one of their their shoulders and the hook that's holding up the cadavers, tucking her feet in. And he's just like, okay. And she's able to push a couple of them into him, and he fires off rounds, but they miss, and she attacks him with one of the hooks that are holding up the cadavers, and he's trying to shoot her. There's this whole fight. She ends up getting the better hand of him and hurting him, and he still has his gun, but she's able to like stab him with this hook a couple of times. And she runs out of the refrigerator, goes back, closes it, and locks it from the outside so he can't get out. And he's starting to have a panic attack because he's in a dark refrigerator locked in with a bunch of cadavers. So he's panicking, and she's like, okay, that's done, I need to call the police. So she needs to call the police, and she goes into the main hospital, and she wants to call the police, and she's attacked, and the security personnel like come at her, and they're like, you're not allowed to be here, you don't work here anymore, you need to leave, like you're trespassing. And when she's there, one of the doctors that are walking by, or one of the hospital personnel, injects her with something because she's pitching like a whole fit. She's fighting everything. She's like, nobody's listening to me, you guys are all crazy. And that knocks her out. And while she's knocked out, one of the doctors is like, oh no, she has this something that's wrong with her. She needs a minor surgery procedure. So they prep her for surgery while she's still clocked out. And while that happens, Mark just happens to be walking in to start his day because it's about to be daytime again. He's like, all right, I gotta start my shifts, gotta get everything ready to go. And while he's walking in, he hears them talk about Susan. And he's like, what happened? And they're like, oh, you didn't hear? It was like one of the residents trapped some guy in a refrigerator in the classrooms, and like they found out he had a gun, and now he's being treated for frostbite and those wounds, and all of this whole thing happened. They're like, yeah, it's too bad what happened to her though. Like, well, what happened? And he's like, well, she needs this minor surgery procedure. They're like, didn't you hear that? Wasn't she your person to train? And he was like, well, where's she at? And they tell him she's in surgery. That happened like an hour ago. She's being prepped and she's in surgery. And so Mark starts freaking out because he's like, oh shit, Susan was right. So he rushes into the surgery suites and finds out that she's having surgery in that one surgery suite that has all the issues. And he tells security, call the police. There's somebody trying to kill her, and we need people here now. And he's like, well, there's no time for me to wait here, because they're telling him to wait for the police. And he's like, there's no time. Get the police, get down to this area. And he was like, I'll meet you down there. He's running down there. And when Susan told him about the altered oxygen piping and tubes, she told him how he got in there. You know, I was in the locker room. I was able to climb up on this, open this up, and then go in there. So he decides that's what he's going to do. So he jumps up there, goes in there, goes to where the suite is, and he sees a man like there with one of the oxygen tanks and lines, like messing with something. So he attacks him while he's in there, and they both fall out of the ceiling while they're fighting. And when they fall out of the ceiling, security's there, they have the police, and then Mark's like, it's this guy who's trying to kill her. And so Susan was given anesthesia while she was being prepped for surgery, but they didn't put the oxygen line in her yet. They didn't like start the surgery or anything. And then Mark falling from the ceiling with somebody trying to kill her stopped the surgery completely. So she wakes up in a hospital bed, and she's like, what happened? And he tells her what happened, and he's like, they were arrested, and he's like, now there's a whole investigation, and there's police, and they stopped at the Jefferson Institute, and they found, you know, so many bodies that had faked death certificates. And he was like, there was this, and turns out it was a whole organ trafficking ring, and they would select patients. Any patients that were going to be, that could have organs that would match whoever was looking, like the clients. That information was given by certain doctors at the hospital that were usually being blackmailed. And that information was given to them. The clients got to pick like the patients or the organs or whatever needed to happen. And then those patients would be given a minor surgery procedure in that one suite. And there was this man that was up there that would mess with the oxygen tank, and that would put them in a coma. And then after they were in a coma for a certain amount of time, they would be transferred to the Jefferson Institute. And while they were there for a little bit, and it depends on if they had family, if they had friends, like how long they would have to be kept alive would depend on their circumstances. If they had no family and nobody was really going to miss them, they would just kind of rubber stamp that death certificate real quick and then harvest the organs and send those off. If they had family or anything, they would keep them alive for weeks or a couple of months before they're like, there's just nothing we could do. This happens to coma patients sometimes. So it was this whole big thing. And because Susan had gone on this investigation, started connecting the dots for everybody, they were able to bring down this whole organ trafficking ring. And while Mark's telling her this, she's like, wow, she's like, that's crazy. She's kind of like, go me. Go me. I didn't listen to anybody, and now you're welcome, world. And Mark's just like, so do you want to go on a date? And so they start dating, and it kind of ends with them like being like, yeah, that's done. I guess she's like, I guess considering the circumstances, I should be able to stay at this hospital for the rest of my residency, right? And so that kind of ends with them just doing this like happily ever after type thing. And it was a weird book. Like I wasn't expecting it to go like, I saw the cover of this book. I had no idea. Like I see the little things hanging down, no idea until that made sense. And I was like, oh, it's on the cover. I get it. And it was a lot of medical jargon in it. Like this book was heavy with the medical jargon to where it felt like every few chapters I was reading a research paper, and I was just like, I don't read research papers for fun. I don't like that. And a lot of these topics don't interest me right now. So it was a slog to get through those. But if you don't mind the medical jargon, or if you are interested in a medical type field or any type of those research papers or anything, or like hearing, it's like a TV show. what's the one, like Grey's Anatomy or something, where they talk a lot of heavy medical jargon while the drama of the show is going on. Like if you like that type of stuff, it's a good read. It's a good book. I enjoyed it. It took some different places that I didn't think it was going to go. I didn't think that I thought Mark would have been a bigger player than he was in it. He was just not. He was just not. He was just kind of very run over by Susan all the time. And Susan was just, I'm like, why are you being such a just jerk to everybody? Just being an ass for no reason. And it was just, I guess it was just Susan being Susan. Like after getting more of her backstory and everything, like, all right, I just see you never had to deal with people like this. And because she was an attractive woman in a male dominated career field, she was so used to being written off just as a dumb woman that she was just like, all right, I'm just gonna write off certain people. Like her bullshit meter with meeting guys was on point. The way she talked about Mark, the way she when she meets new people, she catalogs them on whether they're gonna be worth her time or not, if they're gonna be a hassle or not, or if they were gonna start like hitting on her. So she's like, do I need to make up a fake boyfriend or something to talk to like bring up in this conversation? Like the way she cataloged people was just like, I get that. But it was a very interesting book. I enjoyed it. It wasn't something that I would have been like, yes, this is my jam all the time, but I think it was really good. I rated a 3.5. It was written back in the 70s, so the sexism just was hit really hard in this, like, all the time. And Susan being like the bestest, the smartest, was just kind of smushed in my face a little too much for me to enjoy. I'm like, no, she's not the bestest at everything all the time ever. Like she's very flawed. Like you're telling me she's very flawed. Just tell me she's flawed. Like she's showing me she's flawed. Just say it. Just say it. Flaws make people. Like I would have had way more fun with her with her and her story if they would have just stopped being like, she's the bestest of the bestest. She's so smart and she's so pretty. I read that so much in this book that I was just like, are you sure? See, now I'm doubting. You're telling me this consistently for all of these pages. Like, now I'm not so sure. But that was Coma. It was a very interesting book. Like, I was not expecting a lot of it just because I had no idea what to expect from it. But thank you guys so much for joining me. I appreciate you guys hanging out. If you guys want to hang out with me more, my socials are in the description below. I'm like, not the link, the description below. And don't forget to check out the TLDR series, and I'll be posting more on those a lot quicker because they're easier to record because they're very short. And I'll be trying to get out these longer videos as fast as I can with as much notes as I'm working on being a better note taker throughout this whole process. Writing down, starting a reading journal and everything is helping me, like, okay, actively remember a lot of the details and everything. So we can only get better from here. It's all a learning process. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are, and I'll hopefully talk to you guys soon. Bye.